Hey ladies, how you doing? Welcome back to lesson 3, week 2, the mind body connection and integrate the workshop. I am so happy to have you today. Our class for today, finally getting to one of my favorite topics, one that I really don't understand and love to see how it practically applies to me. This topic is Quantum Physics 101 Day. We're going to talk about the big shifts that are happening in the scientific community when it comes to quantum physics, but especially how that affects us in the world of personal development. We're going to look at the mechanistic model of the universe designed by Sir Isaac Newton and the Newtonian atom. We're going to talk about electrons today, and we're going to look at the quantum model of the universe. We're going to talk about Isaac Albert Einstein today, and how his revolutionary technology really shifted what we're studying and seeing in science today. But before we go there, what I really want to do is actually see how y'all did with your journaling exercise from Wednesday's class on the 6 human needs. So this was not a requirement at all whatsoever, but as I like to say, integration is a practice, right? And we're going to take the tools and learn to integrate them. And one of the tools that I taught you last week from awareness was the tool of the model. And I want to show you how you can basically plug anything into the model. So I took the sheet that you guys all have available to you for download, but remember, we can just do this on a piece of paper. We don't need a fancy sheet to stop us, but this is a really nice way for me to organize it. So when I plug my top need, which is love and connection, into the model as my circumstance, and then I change the observer and manifester into how do I use that need in the positive or fulfill that need in the positive? And how do I fulfill that need in the negative? And then let's play it out in a model so you can really see practically hands on how applicable the model is to really any situation when you're trying to use it as an awareness tool. So I'm sure by doing your journaling exercises so far, you've seen some of these things come up already, but let's look at this in a little bit more detail. As y'all know, my top need is love and connection. So in the positive, when I'm using love and connection in the positive, I have thoughts like, I love myself. I love people. I can and will find ways to serve others, and I can foster love and connection. I have feelings from those thoughts that I feel loved, giving, grateful, satisfied, and fulfilled. And the actions that I take are things like becoming a coach and creating date yourself challenges, which I don't know if y'all saw my post, but throughout March, this is a separate thing. I decided to date myself for a little bit. So I'm going to do a fun little thing that I would do with a partner or want to do with a partner every single day, whether that means something simple like making myself breakfast in bed on a Saturday or just simply looking in the mirror and saying, hey, honey, you look great. What would it be like to date ourselves, right? I thought of that challenge because, of course, how important love and connection is for me. And I do things like spend quality time with my friends and family. The results that I get from those actions is business growth, better relationships, and overall satisfaction. And the new circumstances in my life become look for new ways and opportunities to connect and show love to others, which is the life I want to lead, the life I'm leading, and fulfilling my need for love and connection in the positive. In the negative, I had thoughts, y'all know I talk about my depression when my top need for love and connection was not met by myself. Like, no one loves me. My dad left me. I'll always be alone. I'm not worthy, right? Which led to me being sad, having sadness, feeling anguish, depression, solitude, loneliness. And my actions, I put here depression as an action, but it's a lot of things. I didn't take care of myself. I didn't clean my room. I didn't go to work happily. I wasn't enthusiastic. I didn't participate. I isolated, right? All of those things are like the actions involved in depression. So that would be the actions. I did things like over drinking, no self care. Basically, I checked out of life. And the results I would get is no friends, no new relationships for sure. I had a negative relationship with my family, and basically I was never satisfied. That cycle, the new circumstances, led to more sadness, more depression until I hit my rock bottom moment where I decided something's got to shift. And what I shifted first was my thoughts. And this is kind of from our radical self love class, right? No one loves me, and I still love myself. My dad loved me, and I still love people. I'll always be alone, and I can and always find ways to serve others. I'm not worthy, but I can foster love and communication and connection in my life. And I just started mixing these two models together. I didn't believe these things at first, but I just started that adding that and factor, that radical self-love factor, until eventually this model was really the one that became my manual. And we're going to really bring this in after today's quantum physics class on what are our manuals? What are our states? What kind of state do we live in? And really, what I mean by state is what kind of biochemical world do we live in? This class is really going to bridge the gap because if you really think about bio and chemical and what we're made up of, actually, what everything is made up of in the universe, the smallest pieces are the atoms. So let's go on. Let's put this to the side, go on to that quantum physics class, and learn about a little history. So, the big shift in you. What I want to present in today's class is a little historical overview of the mechanistic model of the universe, which is a cause and effect, a materialistic, a very grounded in the physical viewpoints of the world model of the universe, to the quantum model, the very unpredictable, the potential oriented, the what you could say almost a spiritual approach to science if you really break it down. The unknown factor is real in the quantum model of the universe, and this new frontier, this evolution, is not that old in the scientific community, and where it's really happening in is inside of all of us, those of us experimenting in the fields of personal development, those of us using these ideas and these frameworks to create realities and be examples of things that people thought were impossible for ourselves. You know, the story of Roger Bannister and the 4 Minute Mile, if you're familiar, no one was able to break a 4 minute mile for ever, basically, that we knew about it, counted in history. And Roger Bannister, first and foremost, just believed that it was possible for himself to do so when everybody else said that it's not possible. And this is this whole concept. There's human beings now that are using these quantum theories, and we'll really go into the work of the likes of Joe Dispenza and meditation gurus, and just how a lot of people who have been using quantum science to look at the brain and as well as the mind and heart connection and our electromagnetic fields next week when we look at emotions. But just for now, remember that all of this is happening within us because all of these theories and ideas and scientific concepts that I quite myself don't fully understand are the building blocks of what makes us human, which are atoms, right? Which are the molecules coming together to create the life form, the body that we are in. And our thoughts are also, really, if you think about it, chemical reactions that are atoms communicating in our brain and firing and wiring together. And our emotions are also made up of atoms. Everything in this world is really made up of atoms. So when we look at this small little thing, the atom, the building blocks of life, what can we learn about it in terms of how that affects us? That's my big question. So let's go on. So we're going to go back to about the 17th century. And I want to take you on a little introduction to Rene Descartes, Sir Isaac Newton, and the mechanistic model of the universe. So, like I said, we're looking at the 17th century here. And both Descartes and Newton were mathematicians, really, really genius men. And Descartes was a philosopher as well. Newton was a great scientist. And basically, they stated, using the mechanistic model of the universe, that the universe is controlled by predictable laws, right? Things like A plus B will always equal C, cause and effect style laws. This was really introduced by Descartes and then taken further by Newton. He took these concepts and then positioned himself in line with the ideas that not only was the universe governed by a set of predictable laws, but that human beings could precisely determine and calculate orderly ways in which the physical world would operate. Basically, what he was saying was that we could have a formula to figure out and predict the world, the universe. We just had to figure it out, right? We just haven't figured out the science on what that predictable universe is. And we had to go down to the atom, the smallest level. That's where that formula would be. And he spent his whole life's work doing this. And he really created such a formula that we as human beings utilize and valued. And it came to looking at the atom in the classrooms. When we look at the atom, we always have a very basic kind of image that comes up, right? It's this atom we've seen in the classrooms over and over and over. There's a nucleus. It has a proton and electron. Those give it the weight. And then there's, or I'm sorry, a proton and a neutron in the middle. Those give it most of the weight. And then there's these smaller little things, the electrons, that give it the charge, that interact with other, if I, from what I remember in chemistry, help interact with other atoms to build compounds and molecules. And so these electrons, what Newton said, were always predictable. You could always see how an atom would work. The electron traveled almost like on a track field and it could never go off. And if you were to look at the atom at any point in time, you could see where the electron was, and that could tell you a lot about the way the universe worked, right? We just had to keep studying atoms, different molecules and chemicals. And once we figured out this formula, we could figure out the world. And that was kind of Newtonian's view and Descartes' view on the classic atom. Then, about 200 years later, came Albert Einstein. Now, we've all heard of the equation E equals mc squared, but what does it really mean? So I did some research into this. I'm sure there's so many people that explain this so much better than me. But basically, the way I break it down is Einstein suggested, what he suggested was actually pretty groundbreaking. And what he was saying is that, unlike Descartes and Newton, matter was energy. So Einstein did this by studying light, and he saw that the way light functioned, sometimes as a wave and sometimes as a particle. So what that means, in simple terms, the way that I understand it is that a wave, it's like an up and down factor, right? A wave is a movement. There's always an ebb and flow within a wave, whereas a particle is just one stop on that wave, like this exact position. So Einstein was seeing light be both a multitude of particles and positions, a whole wave, an ebb and flow, and at the exact same time be just one piece of that wave, one drop in the sea. And that was really weird because before that, everything should act the same way all the time if it's water, right? If it is a wave. So what, or light, right? Light should always either be particle or energy because it's the same thing. It should be predictable. And so what happened is after Einstein, a lot of scientists started researching atoms and looking at atoms in smaller and smaller details and saying, how is this possible? And what they realized was that electrons were not actually as predictable as Descartes and Newton thought. Now, Descartes and Newton did have a point, because what happens is that in the quantum atom, the electrons do become predictable when they are being witnessed, when they're being observed. But otherwise, the electrons are all in a field of potentials, and we really don't know where they are in an atom at any given time, which makes atoms a field of potentials. The basic building blocks of life are more energy, more wave, more of an ebb and flow of an evolution. So there's room for dynamic change in there. There's room for unpredictability in there. There's room for variety within the smallest particles of life, while at the same time, they can be concrete in just a moment. They can be predictable in just a moment. They can act in a way that works repeatedly, consistently, over and over, scientifically proven all the time. And so this is like mind blowing stuff, y'all, if you really, really think about it, because it shows that both we know absolutely nothing and we know so much at the exact same time. And it really lets us play around with this idea. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of the idea of the observer effect, but another aspect to the quantum atom is that electrons in the field are only present, actually, only act in a predictable way when there is an observer, when there is another electron force or atom force influencing it or looking at it or investigating it. So once again, these concepts are above my head, but I'll try to break it down in the way that what happens is only when the scientist goes to study the electron does it act in a predictable way, does it act in a predictable fashion. Now, we are all made of atoms and electrons. And the way that I take this very personally and practically in the world of personal development is I think about the world of electrons going on within me when I'm thinking, when I'm feeling, and when I'm acting. What happens in my mind? Where is that space in the electrons? Is there always a potential to think or observe one thing or another? And when I do that, and I choose to focus and keep my focus on the potential that is more positive, more great, more fulfilling for me emotionally, creates more positive emotions in my body, right? Or I choose, even though it doesn't seem like it should be relevant today to feel good about my circumstance, the cause and effect of my life seems like I should be in despair. But instead, I'm going to still choose to practice gratitude because it's potentially available to me. When I do that and I create those states more and more in my body, the observer effect will stay that I should start seeing more and more examples of things, circumstances, places, people in my outer world, in my environment that confirm the states that I'm feeling within. I hope that was kind of y'all were able to follow this. But hopefully, this quote from Albert Einstein himself, not that y'all were not able to follow this, I hope that I can get even better and better at describing this because to me it's one of these concepts and ideas that I like feel and know in my body when it happens, but when I actually start talking about it I still have got a way to go before I'm on that TED Talk stage. But what I really, to bring it down, to make it more grounded, Albert Einstein himself says, and it's ironic because the journal that I bought to keep all my notes in for this class has this quote on it. And it says, imagination is more important than knowledge. And what I really want to bring this class to today is to have you think about the smallest aspect of yourself that you're made out of, the small little particles and atoms and electrons. And ask yourself, is it really cause and effect? Is it these are my circumstances, this is my life, this is my reality, and therefore, like Descartes and Newton say, I'm bound to live the life that I'm going to live, and I really can't do anything about it, and I don't have a big impact, and life is just going to happen to me, right? How does that focus influence the quantum space, the electrons that run through you? How does that focus make you feel? What happens on a electromagnetic level in all of the energy body around you, right? People talk about auras or energy or even our intuitions and our feelings like something's off with that person. What's going on with them, right? Maybe it's because we're sending out and radiating that signal electromagnetically, and the observer effect, atoms seeing atoms, us watching each other, our energies feeling that, are speaking that to each other subconsciously in different parts of ourselves. So, what would happen if we shifted our focus, y'all? What would happen? What kind of reality could we create if we just chose to focus on what we want to imagine? What we want to have in our lives, what we want to have in our dreams? How would, on a chemical level, those thoughts change the basic building blocks of what you're made up of? And so far, or further, or furthermore, not so far, but even more so, how would that affect on a chemical level the physiological building blocks of what your body is made out of? And because none of these things are actually stagnant, and all of these things are both, right, a big ocean, a wave, and a particle, a wave like of energy, also a small particle all in one. They're communicating with one another and they're sending signals not just to the rest of your body, but to the outer world that you live on. And so the more that you can change your inner state, your inner chemistry, the more the conversation within your atoms, within your energy, within your electron potential field speaks to feelings of goodness and kindness and appreciation for yourself and others, the more you'll start to attract that from the outer world. And that is the whole concept that Einstein introduced to the world, that we actually do have an effect, that we humans do play a part, and our consciousness, our observation is, this dog is crazy. He loves this message, y'all, that our observation and our consciousness is that important, that it can change our lives. All right. I'll see you all on Sunday for the class, and we'll talk more about this and really get into emotions and breaking all of this down even more all throughout next week. Okay. I hope you have a beautiful day. Toodaloos.